The Red Death had long devastated the country. No pestilence was ever so fatal or so hideous. Blood was its avatar and its seal, the redness and horror of blood. There were sharp pains and sudden dizziness, and then profuse bleeding from the pores with dissolution. The scarlet stains upon the body, and especially upon the face of the victim, were the pest ban that shut him out from the aid and sympathy of his fellow man. And the whole seizure, progress, and termination of the disease were the incidents of half an hour. Good evening, and welcome to Star of the Day's special Halloween presentation of Hocus POEcus. No, not that one. The Sanderson sisters will not be appearing tonight. Instead, allow me to be your host for the evening. I am Lord Damien MacDonald, local Lehigh Valley-based horror host. Kirsten Almeida invited me to assist in putting together this autumnal event in celebration of the life and works of one of the fathers of Gothic horror, Edgar Allan Poe. Tonight, Kirsten and I, along with Jerry Brucker, Zach Einstein, Krista Metter, Tatiana Torres, Dan Van Arsdale, and Jack Warnke, will lead you through a collection of some of Poe's most famous works. You have already heard me begin the evening with an excerpt from my favorite Poe story, The Mask of the Red Death. We will continue this harrowing and all too timely story through the night, interspaced with recitations of his poems and a retelling of The Telltale Heart. Throughout his career, Poe helped to pioneer the short story format and often credited with birthing the detective fiction genre. He is also one of the first American writers to make an actual living as a writer, as modest as it was. It wasn't until the publishing of The Raven, however, that he would find sudden and extreme popularity. Despite this, he had a difficult time with money, a reputation as a drunkard, and was plagued by tragedy for much of his life. Poe's father left when he was just a small boy, and his mother passed away from tuberculosis a short time after. Poe's wife would later also be claimed by the disease. Then, 2 years after the passing of his wife, Edgar Allan Poe died under mysterious circumstances. To this day, no one knows what the true cause of death was, or why he was found in a frantic and incoherent stupor, wearing clothes that were not his own, wandering the streets of Baltimore. Nor has anyone ever been able to identify the Poe toaster, a shadowy figure that would visit Poe's grave every year on the anniversary of his birth, leaving behind only 3 roses in an unfinished bottle of cognac. What we do know is that this modern reputation as a lunatic and grifter and drug fiend has been greatly exaggerated, if not totally fabricated. After Poe's death, a literary rival bought the rights to his work and republished them alongside a slanderous biography portraying Poe as an insatiable madman. And while this was originally meant to hurt Poe's reputation, the sensation and the shock of such libel only made people even more interested in his works. Such was his influence that he would go on to inspire other great horror icons such as H.P. Lovecraft and Stephen King. Many of his works have also been given a cinematic treatment, most notably in the collaborations between Roger Corman and Vincent Price. And tonight, Star of the Day Event Productions adds its name to an even longer list of theatrical adaptations. So, let us continue on our journey through the sometimes morbid, often morose, and always macabre works of the legendary Edgar Allan Poe.
But the Prince Prospero was happy and dauntless and sagacious. When his dominions were half depopulated, he summoned to his presence 1,000 hale and light-hearted friends from among the knights and dames of his court, and with these retired to the deep seclusion of one of his castellated abbeys.
This was an extensive and magnificent structure, the creation of the prince's own eccentric yet august taste. A strong and lofty wall girdled it in. This wall had gates of iron. The courtiers, having entered, brought furnaces and massy hammers and welded the bolts. They resolved to leave means neither of ingress nor egress to the sudden impulses of despair or of frenzy from within. The abbey was amply provisioned. With such precautions, the courtiers might bid defiance to contagion. The external world could take care of itself. In the meantime, it was folly to grieve or to think. The prince had provided all the appliances of pleasure. There were buffoons, there were improvisatori, there were ballet dancers, there were musicians, there was beauty, there was wine. All these and security were within. Without was the Red Death. It was towards the close of the 5th or 6th month of his seclusion, and while the pestilence raged most furiously abroad, that the Prince Prospero entertained his 1,000 friends at a masked ball of the most unusual magnificence.
True. Nervous. Very, very dreadfully nervous I had been and am. But why will you say that I am mad? The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How then am I mad? Hearken, and observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me day and night. Object there was none. Passion there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. He had the eye of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold, and so by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man, and thus rid myself of the eye forever. Now this is the point. You fancy me mad. Madmen know nothing. But you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded. What caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation I went to work. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. And every night, about midnight, I turned the latch of his door and opened it so gently. And then, when I had made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in the dark lantern, all closed, that no light shone out. And then I thrust in my head. Oh, you would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. I moved it slowly, very, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening so far that I could see him as he lay upon his bed. Would a madman have been so wise as this? And then, when my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern cautiously. Oh, so cautiously. Cautiously, for the hinges creaked. I undid it just so much that a single thin ray fell upon the vulture eye. And this I did for 7 long nights. Every night, just at midnight. But I found the eye always closed. And so it was impossible to do the work. For it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye.
And every morning when the day broke, I went boldly into the chamber and spoke courageously to him, calling him by name in a hearty tone, and inquiring how he has passed the night. So you see, he would have been a very profound old man indeed to suspect expect that every night, just at 12, I looked in upon him, while he slept. Upon the 8th night, I was more than unusually cautious in opening the door. A watch's minute hand moves more quickly than did mine. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers, of my sagacity. I could scarcely contain my feelings of triumph. To think that there I was, opening the door, little by little, and he not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea, and perhaps he heard me, for he moved on the bed, suddenly, as if startled. Now, you may think that I drew back, but no. His room was as black as pitch with the thick darkness. But the shutters were closed, fastened, through fear of robbers. And so I knew that he could not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing it on steadily, steadily. I had my head in, and was about to open the lantern when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening, and the old man sprang up in bed, crying out, "Who's there?" I kept quite still and said nothing. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle, and in the meantime I did not hear him lie down. He was still sitting up in the bed, listening, just as I have done, night after night, hearkening to the death watches on the wall. Presently I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was the groan of mortal terror. It was not a groan of pain or of grief. Oh no! It was a low, stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. I knew that sound well. Many a night, just at midnight, when all the world slept, it has welled up from my own bosom, deepening with its dreadful echo the terrors that distracted me. I say I knew it well. I knew what the old man felt, and I pitied him, although I chuckled at heart. I knew that he had been lying awake ever since the first slight noise, when he had turned in the bed. His fears had been ever since growing upon him. He'd been trying to fancy them causeless, but could not. He had been saying to himself, it is nothing but the wind in the chimney. It is only a mouse crossing the floor. Or, it is merely a cricket which has made a single chirp. Yes, he had been trying to comfort himself with these suppositions, but he had found all in vain.
All in vain, because death, in approaching him, had stalked, with his black shadow before him, and enveloped the victim. And it was the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused him to feel, although he never saw nor heard, to feel the presence of my head within the room. When I had waited a long time very patiently without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a very, very little crevice in the lantern. So I opened it. You cannot imagine how stealthily, until at length a simple dim ray, like the thread of the spider, shot out from the crevice, and fell full upon the vulture eye. It was open, wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it with perfect distinctness, all a dull blue with a hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow in my bones. But I could see nothing else of the old man's face or person, for I directed the ray as if by instinct, precisely upon the damned spot. And I have not told you that what you mistake for madness is over cuteness of sense. Now I say, there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well, too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury as the beating of a drum stimulus the soldier into courage, but even yet I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless. I tried how steadily I could maintain the ray upon the eye. Meantime, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew grew quicker and quicker and louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder. I say louder by the moment! Do you mark me while I have told you that I am nervous? So I am. And now, at the dead hour of the night, amid the dreadful silence of that old house, so strange a noise as this excited me to uncontrollable terror. Yet, for some minutes longer I refrained, and stood still.
But the beating grew louder. I thought the heart must burst, and now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leapt into the room. He shrieked once only. In an instant, I dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him. I then smiled gaily to find the deed so far done. But for many minutes, the heart beat on with a muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me. It would not be heard through the wall. At length it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there many minutes. There was no pulsation. It was stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more. If still you think me mad, you will think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned, and I worked hastily, but in silence. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the hand and the arms and the legs. I then took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber and deposited all between the scantlings. I then replaced the board so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye could even, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot whatsoever. I had been too wary for that. A tub had caught all. Ha-ha! When I had made an end of these labors, it was 4 o'clock, still dark as midnight. As the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart, for what had I now to fear? There entered 3 men who introduced themselves with perfect suavity as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by a neighbor during the night. Suspicion of foul play had been aroused. Information had been lodged at the police office, and they, the officers, had been deputed to search the premises. I smiled, for what had I to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own in a dream. The old man, I mentioned, was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search well. I led them at length to his chamber. I showed them his treasures, secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room and desired them here to rest from their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim.
The officers were satisfied. My manners had convinced them that I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerily, they chattered of familiar things. But ere long I felt myself getting pale, and I wished them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears. But still they sat and still chatted. The ringing became more distinct. It continued and became more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued. It gained definiteness until at length I found that the noise was not within my ears. No doubt, I now grew very pale, but I talked more fluently, with a heightened voice, yet the sound increased. And what could I do? It was low, dull, quick sound, much such a sound as a watch makes when it's enveloped in cotton. I gasped for a breath, and yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the noise steadily increased. I arose and argued about trifles in a high key with violent gesticulation, but the noise steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? I paced the floor to and fro with heavy strides, as it exceeds to fury by the observation of the men, but the noise steadily increased. Oh God, what could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore, I swung a chair which I had been sitting and grated it upon the boards. But the noise arose over all and continually increased. It grew louder, louder, louder. And still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible they heard not? Almighty God! No, no, they heard. They suspected. They knew. They were making a mockery of my horror. This, I thought, this I think, but anything was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear those hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt I must scream or die. No, again, hark! Louder! 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 Villains! I shrieked. Disassembled no more. I admit the deed. I tear up the planks. Here is the beating of his hideous heart.
But evil things in robes of sorrow assailed the monarch's high estate. Let us mourn, for never morrow shall dawn upon him, desolate. And round about his home, the glory that blushed and bloomed is but a dim remembered story of the old time entombed. And travelers now within that valley, through the red litten windows see vast forms that move fantastically to a discordant melody. While like a ghastly rapid river through the pale door, a hideous throng rush out forever and laugh, but smile no more.
It was a voluptuous scene, that masquerade. But first, let me tell of the rooms in which it was held. These were 7, an imperial suite. In many palaces, however, such suites form a long and straight vista, while the folding doors slide back nearly to the walls on either hand, so that the view of the whole extent is scarcely impeded. Here, the case was very different, as might have been expected from the Duke's love of the bazaar. The apartments were so irregularly disposed that the vision embraced little more than one at a time. There was a sharp turn at every 20 or 30 yards, and at each turn, a novel effect. To the right and left, in the middle of each wall, a tall and narrow Gothic window looked out upon a closed corridor which pursued the windings of the suite. These windows were of stained glass whose color varied in accordance with the prevailing hue of the decoration of the chamber into which it opened. That at the eastern extremity was hung, for example, in blue and vividly blue were its windows. The second chamber was purple, its ornaments and tapestries, and here these were purple. The third was green throughout, and so were the casements. The fourth was furnished and lighted with orange. The fifth
The seventh apartment was closely shrouded in black velvet tapestries that hung all over the ceiling and down the walls, falling in heavy folds upon the same material and here in this chamber. The color of the roofs failed to correspond with the decorations. The panes here were scarlet, a deep blood color. Now, in no one of the 7 apartments was there any lamp or candelabrum amid the profusion of golden ornaments that lay scattered to and fro or depended from the roof. There was no light of any kind emanating from lamp or candle within the suite of chambers. But in the corridors that followed the suite, there stood, opposite to each window, a heavy tripod bearing a brazier of fire that projected its rays through the tinted glass and so glaringly illumined the room, and thus were produced a multitude of gaudy and fantastic appearances. But in the western or black chamber, the effect of the firelight that streamed upon the dark hangings through the blood-tinted panes was ghastly in the extreme, and produced so wild a look upon the countenances of those who entered, that there were few of the company bold enough to set foot within its precincts that all.
Ah, broken is the golden bowl, the spirit flown forever. Let the bell toll, a saintly soul floats on the Stygian river. Ye de Vere, hast thou no tear? Weep now or nevermore. See, on yon drear and rigid bier, low lies thy love Lenore. Come, let the burial rite be read, the funeral song be sung, an anthem for the queenliest dead that ever died so young. Dirge for her that doubly did, in that she died so young. Wretches! Ye loved her for her wealth, and ye hated her for her pride. And when she fell in feeble health, ye blessed her that she died. How shall the ritual then be read? The requiem how be sung? By you, by yours, the evil eye, by yours the slanderous tongue, that did to death the innocents that died and died so young? Hecavimus! Yet rave not thus, but let a Sabbath song go up to God so solemnly the dead may feel no wrong. Sweet Lenore hath gone before with hope that flew beside, leaving thee wild for the dear child that should have been thy bride. For her, the fair and debonair, that now so lowly lies, the life upon her yellow hair, but not within her eyes. The life still there upon her hair, the death upon her eyes. Avaunt! Avaunt! From fiends below the indignant ghost is riven, from hell unto a high estate, far up within the heaven, from grief and groan to a golden throne beside the King of heaven. Let no bell toll then, lest her soul, amid its hallowed mirth, should catch the note as it doth float up from the damned earth. Aye, tonight my heart is light, no dirge why of praise, but waft the angel on her flight, with a paean of old days.
It was in this apartment also that there stood against the western wall a gigantic clock of ebony. Its pendulum swung to and fro with a low, deep, monotonous bang. And when the minute hand made the circuit of the face, and the hour was to be stricken, there came from the brazen nodules of the clock a sound that was so loud and clear and deep, exceeding the musical, with so peculiar a note and emphasis, that at each lapse of an hour, the musicians of the orchestra would constrain to pause momentarily to hearken to the sound, and thus the waltzers before ceased their we've disconcerted a whole gay company. And while the chimes of the clock yet rang, it was observed that even the giddiest grew pale. The more aged and sedate passed their hand over their brow, as if in confused reverie or meditation. But when the echoes fully ceased, a light laughter pervaded the whole assembly. The musicians looked at each other and smiled as if in their own nervousness and folly. They made whispering vows to each other that at the next chiming of the clock it should produce in them no single emotion. Then, after the lapse of 60 minutes, which embraces 3,600 seconds of the time that flies, came another chime of the clock. And then the same meditation, tremulousness, disconcert as before. But, in spite of these things, it was a gay and magnificent night. The tastes of the Duke were peculiar. He disregarded the decor of mere fashion. He had a fine eye for his things, and his conceptions glowed with barbaric luster. There are some who would have thought him mad. His followers felt that he was young. But it was necessary to see and hear and touch him to be sure that he was not.
Once, it smiled in a silent dell, where the people did not dwell. They went unto the wars, trusting in the mild-eyed stars, nightly, from their azure towers to keep watch above the flowers, in the midst to which all day the red sunlight lazily lay. And now each visitor shall confess the sad valley's restlessness. Nothing there is motionless, nothing save the airs that brood over this magic solitude. Ah. By no wind are stirred the trees that palpitate like the chill seas around the misty Hebrides. By no wind those clouds are driven that rustle through the unquiet heaven uneasily, from morn till even. Over the violets there that lie in myriad types of the human eye. Over the lilies there that wave and weep above a nameless grave. They wave. From out their fragrant tops, eternal dews come down in drops, and they weep. From off their delicate stems, perennial tears descend in gems.
He had directed, in great part, the movable embellishments of the seven chambers, upon occasion of the great fete, and it was his own guiding taste which had given character to the masqueraders. Be sure, they were grotesque. There were much glare and glitter and piquancy and phantasm, much of what has been since seen in Hernany. There were arabesque figures with unsuited limbs and appointments. There were delirious fancies, such as the madman fashions. There were much of the beautiful, much of the wanton, much of the bizarre, something of the terrible, and not a little of that which might have incited disgust. To and fro in the seven chambers there stalked, in fact, a multitude of dreams, and these, the dreams, writhed in and about, taking hue from the rooms, and causing the wild music of the orchestra to seem as the echo of their steps. And anon, there strikes the ebony clock, stands in the hall of the velvet, and then, for a moment, all is still, and all is silent, save the voice of the clock. The dreams are stiff frozen as they stand, but the echoes of the chime die away. They have endured but an instant, and a light, half-subdued laughter floats after them as they depart. And now again the music swells, and the dreams live and ride to and fro, more merrily than ever, taking cue from the many tinted windows through which stream the rays from the tripods. But to the chamber which lies most westwardly of the seven, there are now none of the maskers who venture, for the night is waning away, and there flows a ruddier light through the blood-colored panes, and the blackness of the sable drapery appalls, and to him whose foot falls upon the sable carpet, there comes from the near clock of ebony a muffled peal more solemnly emphatic than any which reached their ears, who indulged in the more remote gaieties of the other apartments. But these other apartments were densely crowded, and in them beat feverishly the heart of life, and the revel went whirlingly on, until, at length, there commenced the sounding of midnight upon the clock. And then the music ceased, as I have told, and the evolutions of the waltzers were quieted, and there was an uneasy cessation of all things as before. But now there were 12 strokes to be sounded by the bell of the clock. And thus it happened, perhaps, that more of thought crept with more of time into the meditations of the thoughtful among those who reveled. And thus too it happened, perhaps, that before the last echoes of the last chime had utterly sunk into silence, there were many individuals in the crowd who had found leisure to become aware of the presence of a masked figure which had arrested the attention of no single individual before. And the rumor of this new presence having spread itself whisperingly around, there arose at length from the whole company a buzz or murmur, expressive of disapprobation and surprise, then finally of terror, of horror, and of disgust.
From childhood's hour, I have not been as others were. I have not seen as others saw. I could not bring my passions from a common spring. From the same source I have not taken my sorrow. I could not awaken my heart to joy at the same tone. And all I loved alone. Then, in my childhood, in the dawn of a most stormy life, was drawn from every depth of good and ill the mystery which binds me still. From the torrent, or the fountain, from the red cliff of the mountain, from the sun that round me rolled in its autumn tint of gold, from the lightning in the sky that passed me flying by, from the thunder and the storm and the cloud that took the form, when the rest of heaven was blue, of a demon in my view.
In an assembly of phantasms such as I have painted, it may well be supposed that no ordinary appearance could have excited such sensation. In truth, the masquerade license of the night was nearly unlimited, but the figure in question had out-Heroded Herod, and gone beyond the bounds of even the prince's indefinite decorum. There are chords in the hearts of the most reckless which cannot be touched without motion. Even the the utterly lost. Life and death are equally jest. There are matters of which no jest can be made. The whole company, indeed, seemed now deeply to feel that. The costume and bearing of the stranger, neither wit nor propriety existed. The figure was tall and gaunt, and shrouded from head to foot in the habiliments of the grave. The mask which concealed the visage was made so nearly to resemble the countenance of a stiffened corpse that the closest scrutiny must have had difficulty in detecting the cheat. And yet, all this might have been endured, if not proved, by the mad reveler Brown. But the mummer had gone so far as to assume the type of the Red Death. His vesture was dabbled in blood, and his broad brow, with all the features of the face, was sprinkled with scarlet horror.
Take this kiss on the brow. In parting from you now, thus much let me avow. You were not wrong who deemed that my days have been a dream. Yet, if hope has flown away in a night, or in a day, in a vision, or a none, is therefore the less gone. All that we see or seem is but a dream within a dream. I stand amid the roar of a surf-tormented shore. I hold within my hand a grain of the golden sand. How few, yet how they creep through my fingers to the deep. While I weep, oh God, can I not grasp them with a tighter clasp? Oh God, can I not save one in the pitiless wave? Is all that we see or seem but a dream within a dream?
When the eyes of the Prince Prospero fell upon this spectral image, which with a slow and solemn movement, as if more fully to sustain its role, stalked to and fro among the waltzers, he was seen to be convulsed, in the first moment, with a strong shudder either of terror or distaste, but in the next, his brow reddened with rage. Who dares? He demanded hoarsely of the courtiers who stood near him. Who dares insult us with this blasphemous mockery? Seize him and unmask him, that we may know whom we have to hang at sunrise from the battlements. It was in the eastern or blue chamber in which stood the Prince Prospero as he uttered these words. They rang throughout the 7 rooms, loudly and clearly. But the prince was a bold and robust man, and the music had become hushed at the waving of his hand.
It was many and many a year ago, in a kingdom by the sea, that a maiden there lived whom you may know by the name of Annabel Lee. And this maiden, she lived with no other thought than to love and be loved by me. She was a child, and I was a child in this kingdom by the sea, but we loved with a love that was more than love, I and my Annabel Lee, with a love that the winged seraphs of heaven coveted her and me. And this is the reason that long ago in this kingdom by the sea, a wind blew out of a cloud by night, chilling my Annabel Lee, so that her high-born kinsman came and bore her away from me to shut her up in a sepulchre in this kingdom by the sea. The angels, not half so happy in heaven, went envying her and me. Yes, that was the reason, as all men know in this kingdom by the sea, that a wind came out of a cloud, chilling and killing my Annabel Lee. But our love, it was stronger by far than the love of others who were older than we, of many far wiser than we. And neither the angels in heaven above nor the demons down under the sea can ever dissever my soul from the soul of the beautiful Annabel Lee. For the moon never beams without bringing me dreams of the beautiful Annabel Lee. And the stars never rise, but I see the bright eyes of the beautiful Annabel Lee. And so, all the night tide, I lie down by the side of my darling, my life and my bride, in her sepulchre there by the sea, in her tomb by the side of the sea.
It was in the blue room where stood the prince, with a group of pale courtiers by his side. At first, as he spoke, there was a slight rushing movement in this group toward the intruder, who at the moment was also near at hand, and now with deliberate and stately step made closer approach to the speaker. But from a certain nameless awe, with which the mad assumptions of the mummer had inspired the whole party, there were none found who put forth hand to seize him, that unimpeded he passed within a yard of the prince's person. And while the vast assembly, as if with one impulse, shrank from the centers of the rooms to the walls, he made his way uninterruptedly, but with the same solemn and measured step which had distinguished him from the first, through the blue chamber to the purple, through the purple to the green, through the green to the orange, through this again to the white, and even thence to the violet. Here a decided movement had made to arrest him. It was then, however, the Prince Prospero, maddening with rage and the shame of his own momentary cowardice, hurriedly rushed through the 6 chambers, with none to follow, on account of the deadly terror that had seized upon all.
Lo, 'tis a gala night within the lonesome latter years. A host of angels bewinged, bedight in veils and drowned in tears, sit in a theatre to see a play of hopes and fears, while the orchestra fitfully breathes the music of the spheres. Mimes, in the form of God on high, mutter and mumble low, and hither and thither fly, at bidding of vast, formless things that shift the scenery to and fro, flapping from out their condor wings invisible woe. Oh, this motley drama, it shall not be forgot, and its phantom chased forevermore by a crowd that sees it not, to a circle that ever returneth to the self-same spot, and much of madness, and more of sin, and horror, the soul of the plot. But see, amid them in the crowd, a crawling shape intrudes, a blood-red thing that writhes from out the scenic solitude. It writhes, and with its mortal pangs the mimes become its food, and seraph soul but vermin fangs of human gore imbued. Out all the lights, out all, and over each quivering form the curtain of funeral pall comes down with the rush of a storm, and the angels, all pallid and wan, uprising and veiling affirm that the play is the tragedy, man, and its hero, a conqueror worm.
He bore aloft a drawn dagger and had approached in rapid impetuosity, within 3 or 4 feet of the retreating figure, when the latter, having attained the extremity of the velvet apartment, turned suddenly and confronted his pursuer. There was a sharp cry, and the dagger dropped, gleaming upon the sable carpet, upon which instantly afterwards fell prostrate the Prince Prosper, and then summoning the wild courage of despair, a throng of the revelers at once threw themselves into the black parlor, and seizing the murmur, whose tall figure stood motionless and erect within the shadows of the ebony clock, gasped in unutterable horror at finding the grave cerements and the corpse-like mask, which they handled with so violent a rudeness, unattended by any tangible form.
Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary, over many quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door. Only this and nothing more. Ah, distinctly I remember, it was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow, vainly I had sought to borrow from my books surcease of sorrow, sorrow for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels named Lenore, nameless here, forevermore. And the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before, so that now, to still the beating of my heart, I stood repeating, "'Tis some visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door, some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door, only this and nothing more." Presently my soul grew stronger, hesitating then no longer. "Sir," said I, "or madam, truly your forgiveness I implore. But the fact is I was napping, when so gently you came tapping, when so faintly you came rapping at my chamber door, that I scarce was sure I heard you. Here I open wide the door. Darkness there, and nothing more. Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there, wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. But the silence was unbroken, and the stillness gave no token, and the only word there spoken was the whispered word, "Lenore?" This I uttered, and an echo murmured back the word, "Lenore?" Back into the chamber turning, all my soul within me burning, soon again I heard a tapping, somewhat louder than before. "Surely," said I, "surely that is something at my window lattice. Let me then see what thereat is, and this mystery explore. Let my heart be still a moment, and this mystery explore. 'Tis the wind, and nothing more." Open here I flung the shutter. Then, with many a flirt and flutter, in there stepped a stately raven of the saintly days of yore. Not the least obeisance made he, not a minute stopped or stayed he, but with mien of lord or lady, perched above my chamber door, perched above the bust of Pallas, just above my chamber door, perched and sat, and nothing more. Then this ebony bird, beguiling my sad fancy into smiling by the grave and stern decorum of the countenance it wore, "Though thy crest be shorn and shaven, thou," said I, "art sure no craven, ghastly grim and ancient raven, wandering in from nightly shore. Tell me what thy lordly name is on the night's Plutonian shore." Quoth the raven, "Nevermore." Much I marveled, this ungainly fowl, to hear discourse so plainly, though the answer little meaning, little relevancy bore. For we cannot help agreeing that no living human being ever yet was blessed with seeing bird above his chamber door, bird or beast upon the sculptured bust above his chamber door, with such a name as Nevermore. But the raven, sitting lonely on the placid bust, spoke only that one word, as if his soul in that one word he did outpour. Nothing further than he uttered, not a feather than he fluttered, till I scarcely more than muttered, "Other friends have flown before. On the morrow he will leave me, as my hopes have flown before." Then the bird said, "Nevermore." Startled by the stillness broken, by reply so aptly spoken, "Dauntless," said I, "what it utters is its only stock and store. caught from some unhappy master, whom unmerciful disaster followed fast and followed faster, till the songs one burden bore, till the dirges of his hopes that melancholy burden bore, of never, nevermore. But the raven, still beguiling all my fancy into smiling, straight I wheeled a cushioned seat in front of bird and bust and door. Then upon the velvet sinking, I betook myself to linking fancy unto fancy, thinking what this ominous bird of yore, what this grim, ungainly, ghastly, gaunt, and ominous bird of yore meant in croaking, nevermore. This I sat, engaged in guessing, but no syllable expressing to the fowl whose fiery eyes now burned into my bosom's core. This and more I sat divining, with my head at ease reclining on the cushion's velvet lining, with the lamplight gloating o'er, but whose velvet lining, with the lamplight gloating o'er, she shall press. Ah, nevermore. Then methought the air grew denser, perfumed by some unseen censer, swung by seraphim whose footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor. Wretch, I cried, thy God hath lent thee, by these angels he hath sent thee, respite, respite and nepenthe from my memories of Lenore. Quaff, oh quaff this kind nepenthe, and forget this lost Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, where the tempest sent, or where the tempest tossed thee here ashore, desolate, yet all undaunted, on this desert land enchanted, on this home by horror haunted, tell me truly, I implore, is there balm in Gilead? Tell me, I implore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, by that heaven that bends above us, by that God we both adore, tell this soul with sorrow laden, if within the distant Aden it shall clasp a sainted maiden whom the angels named Lenore, clasp a rare and radiant maiden whom the angels named Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Be that word our sign of parting, bird or fiend, I shrieked upstarting, get thee back into the tempest and the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume as a token of that lie thy soul hath spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken. Quit the bust above my door. Take thy beak from out my heart, and take thy form from off my door. Quoth the raven, nevermore. And that raven, never flitting, still is sitting on the pallid bust of Pallas just above my chamber door. And his eyes have all the seeming of a demon that is dreaming, and the lamplight o'er him streaming throws his shadow on the floor. And my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore.
And now was acknowledged the presence of the Red Death. He had come like a thief in the night, and one by one dropped the revelers in the blood-bedewed halls of their revel, and died each in the despairing posture of his fall, and the life of the ebony clock went out with that of the last of the gay, and the flames of the tripods expired, and darkness and decay and the Red Death held illimitable dominion over all.